Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
The front pages, at least, are quite good for Theresa May today. There's the Sunday Telegraph, Brexit. May plays the Trump card. That's about Donald Trump's promise of a big, fast deal. And again, there's the Sunday Times, similar kind of thing. Trump throws May a lifeline with trade deal. And it's not just Trump, it's Modi and Xi as well. Sunday Express, May is dealt Trump card on Brexit, the same kind of headline there, fairly obvious pun. The Observer, no surprise, takes a rather more pessimistic view with a stark warning from German industry that Britain is not going to get the kind of easy deal, easy access into the single market that it thinks likely. And finally, I talked about the poison dripping into the Sunday papers. May must quit now, says Chief Davis ally. That's Andrew Mitchell, and he doesn't deny saying that she was in trouble and has to stand aside. But whether that is really a plot or not, well, we'll discuss all of that later. But we're going to start with the G20. Sarah.
Yes, well, Mrs May has come back with a spring in her step because the world leaders were very nice to her, and particularly Donald Trump, who promised her a very big deal, a very powerful, a huge deal. We're not quite sure what it involves, but it's going to be huge. We know that bigly. And as you say, China, Japan, India, she's coming back with something that could be good for Brexit Britain. But we're only calling it a lifeline. She's still on the ropes. I mean, everything that she does is now seen within the context of internal battles in the Tory party. It's seen as a bit of a rebuke to her Chancellor, who'd been saying that we have to sort of hug as closely as we possibly can to the EU in our deals.
Absolutely.
And there's plenty of plotting going on behind the scenes.
Infighting is all over the place in the papers.
All over the place.
Meanwhile, we kind of enjoy the G20 as a spectacle on in many ways, including Ivana Trump perching on the sofa between, I think it's the Chinese president and Angela Merkel.
Yeah, I mean, this is a wonderful, it's a bit of a fuzzy shot, but this is wonderful. We have here President Xi, we have Angela Merkel, we have Theresa May, we have President Erdogan, and we have, hang on a moment, not elected, first daughter.
Ivanka Trump.
Ivanka Trump. And that is I'm afraid it's not a very good look for America, and I speak as someone who's half American, and it's not a good look for the world's biggest democracy. Nor
necessarily are the protests in Hamburg a good look for Germany, Ian.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really interesting the way in which these summits now happen, in that there's a bubble inside which all of that goes on, all of this, and then outside you had probably the worst demonstrations and riots, if you will, actually, since Genoa in 2001. And there's a brilliant piece by Philip Alterman in Hamburg which explains just how serious it was. Hundreds of injured police. And what troubles me about it, and I think what people should be concerned about, is that the atmosphere is so febrile internationally at the moment, and the global economy is not quite as strong as everyone thinks it is, and we're moving into an era of protest and a rise of a resurgent hard left, just at a point
these are people who feel let down by the economy, the world economy, of course.
Precisely, and I think the ingredients are there as interest rates rise and we start to maybe get into some difficult economic decisions in the next year. Things could get a lot bumpier.
Meanwhile, we have Brexit to think about. The single most interesting piece, I thought, Stephen, in today's papers was the former Brexit minister, David Jones, who's left the government, sacked from the government, writing really quite an angry and outspoken piece in the Mail on Sunday.
Yes, he's explicitly talking about the fact that there are people in the cabinet and in Whitehall who he says are trying to block Brexit, or at least have a form of Brexit which is so close to staying in we might as well have never left. He references Hotel California. And again, it comes back to the government's weaknesses, because the big problem for Theresa May is, while she is mostly the candidate of hard Brexit, as it were, which is why one of the reasons why she might be more secure than we think, the issue of money is the one trump card she's sort of kept her head. She hasn't ruled out continuing to pay into the EU to get the standard of access we'd like. He's coming out explicitly against that, and the difficulty for the government is it's quite hard to see any deal, really, that commands majority support in the Conservative Party, let alone in the House of Commons as a whole. So it's going to get quite gnarly very quickly, as well as, of course, the economic backdrop that Ian talks about.
Because there's another piece in the Sunday Times talking about how angry the Remainers are with Theresa May. She's not making anybody happy at the moment. But in that piece, David Jones talks about treason, and he says there are 4 things that are going to happen if we're not careful. We're going to stay in the single market, we're going to stay in the customs union, we're going to stay under the European Court of Justice, and we'll carry on paying money. And that is not Brexit, that is not leaving. And there's an extraordinary quote in the same paper about a pro-Brexit MP speaking anonymously, saying, well, if it's a question of threatening Brexit, if Theresa May's weakness means we're going to not get a proper Brexit, we'd rather have a Labour government for a while. I'd rather bring the house down.
What could possibly go wrong? I mean, it does illustrate that Brexiteers and ultra-Remainers all need a holiday. Actually, need to go to the south of France or Spain and just lie down for a while. But having said that, there is this extraordinary difficulty that the Tory party has, in that it's clear to everyone else that there needs to be some form of compromise or certain concessions delivered, but a substantial part of the parliamentary party that simply isn't going to
wants no concessions.
There is a kamikaze wing, for sure, of the Tory party, which would rather lose power than see their precious, very hard Brexit be delivered. And it's absolutely mad. I mean, it wouldn't be the first time that Jeremy Corbyn has been underestimated. Yeah. You remember all the sort of Labour moderates who thought, oh, we'll just put him on the ballot. What could possibly go wrong?
I think it's a pretty small group, but then so's the government's.
Yes.
There's a really interesting question here, Stephen, about Jeremy Corbyn, because he has been, as it were, taking quite a hardline Brexit position. And we were teasing Labour last week with the Nigel Farage tweet, you know, Jeremy Corbyn's almost a proper chap, he said. But actually, the bigger question is, can Jeremy Corbyn use Theresa May's problems over things like the Great Repeal Bill to force some kind of Commons defeat, which brings on the autumn election he wants?
Well, yes, I mean, all he needs is an issue on which 7 Conservative MPs agree with the majority Labour view. This is very much an issue where there is a majority consensus around the Labour view. The Great Repeal Bill next week will be very uncomfortable for the government for precisely this reason, particularly around the issue of the continuing role of the ECJ. Whereas Ian says, most people recognise you have to have some kind of compromise. That's very much the view of the Labour Party. Of course, Jeremy's personal politics are not that into the European Court of Justice, but he doesn't have religion on the EU. He's a Eurosceptic, but he's not a kamikaze Eurosceptic. And so he's very willing to use this kind of issue as a wedge.
And fundamentally, I think Labour thinks they have the Remainer vote in the bag, or the substantial majority of it, so they don't worry too much about it.
It reminds me a lot of what John Smith, for example, did over Maastricht, where he actually agreed with the government, but when you're attempting to bring down a government, that doesn't really matter. It's all about the numbers and the tactics.
Now, Ian, I mentioned Andrew Mitchell, who's alleged to be a key ally of David Davis. You never know whether these things are really true or not, saying that Theresa May is in deep trouble and she needs to be a leadership change. David Davis, if I was him, I would not be very happy with today's coverage generally, because he is all over the papers. And, you know, he is the obvious unity candidate for the Tory party in due course. He's the guy who can hold things together. But you can't do that if people think that you're launching a putsch as well.
Yeah, I mean, Andrew Mitchell, of course, it shouldn't be forgotten, ran David Davis's campaign in 2005, where Davis lost to David Cameron, famously. But I think, yes, there is a lot of plotting going on and a lot of conversations going on.
Andrew Mitchell says, you know, this was a private conversation, don't entirely recognise the words.
There's no such thing at the moment.
There is no conversation. Certainly in front of Tory MPs there isn't.
Yeah, in our paper, he's quoted by sources as saying people who think that should go and have a quiet lie down. Yeah. So I think he's playing both ends on this game.
Yeah, I think the question really for Theresa May is, and the difficulty, and the reason she might be replaced sooner than people think, is that a lot of this is going to come down to authority. We talk about, in the Mail it says the PM's lost all authority. And when you get to the next stage of doing a deal with the European Union, a lot of it's going to come down to the personalities. Can the Prime Minister sit down with Macron and Merkel and actually make a breakthrough?
She has to come back next week and knock some heads together and reassert herself in a big way, doesn't she? I'm sure she will attempt to do that, but how many prime ministerial relaunches have we lived through? They tend not to work. Now, if there's one issue where the Conservatives have been on the back foot and in some disarray, I guess it's tuition fees, after that big offer from Jeremy Corbyn during the election campaign. And more news on that this morning, Sarah.
Yes, I mean, this is an issue that I've been following very closely because I have a daughter at university, and I definitely think the Tories have got themselves into a big hole over this. Tuition fees have been a much bigger issue than they ever dreamt of. And what they're particularly embarrassed about now is the spotlight on these punitive interest rates that are going to be charged on tuition fees. We're in a very low interest rate period. Kids are running up debts of £40,000, £50,000 and are expected to pay 6% interest on them coming this autumn. And the government know that Jeremy Corbyn will continue to win this issue, hands down, and maybe he will anyway. But I think we're saying, we're quoting sources close to Joe Johnson, the Education Secretary, this morning, saying that they're going to review those interest rates. We're calling for it in our leader, and I'm sure those interest rates are going to come down.
I think inflation plus 3%, inflation plus 3% as the measure, I think happened under George Osborne when he was Chancellor. So maybe we can expect an investigation by the Evening Standard.
Yes,
because the other thing
I mean, I'm not paying that on my mortgage, so why should students pay it?
If you don't pay your mortgage for 3 years, you'd lose the house. Whereas when I didn't pay my tuition fees for 3 years, no one has yet to repossess my degree.
Someone standing in just behind you on the side of the studio.
Just be very, very careful. But yeah, I think the difficulty with tuition fees is it's actually a clever way the Treasury found of raising income tax on a group of people who didn't vote. Jeremy Corbyn has politicised those people. They do vote now, and now it's just an income tax rise, and we know how unpopular and short-lived rises on income tax tend to be.
Meanwhile, on the Labour side, we've got a big deselection row going on. Calls for mandatory reselection of MPs, which can threaten lots and lots of, as it were, Blairite or more centrist Labour MPs. And some of them are now saying, if that happens, we'll cause by-elections. I never quite believe these stories, but...
Yeah, I mean, there's a good story in the Sunday Times by Caroline Wheeler on it. But it's one of those things where you kind of feel, well, yeah, come out and give us a name. Until then, it doesn't feel very plausible. Not least because I actually think that deselections are less likely to happen than people think. The average person who voted for Jeremy Corbyn is not someone frothing on Twitter with, you know, a hammer and sickle. It's someone who's deeply concerned about the condition of the public services, worried about the European Union. Actually, the Labour Party is more normal in the country than I think people think it is.
There has been a huge malicious war against Luciana Berger, hasn't there, on Merseyside, which is real echoes of the old militant.
But yeah, but that's where militants were always strong in the past. And I think that's the important thing to remember from the 1980s. Actually, very few MPs were deselected, and some of them, you know, like Michael O'Halloran, the person who lost his seat, Jeremy Corbyn ended up taking, was deselected because he was lazy, right? Actually, the Labour Party is less factional than people believe. The average Labour member, I think, is much more well-disposed to their own MP than we necessarily think.
But it does illustrate that while all the focus is on the serious troubles that the Conservative Party has, there is, the Labour Party is behind the scenes at war in its own way, and I think the moderates really have got to work out how on earth they respond. I think they should be signing up moderate Labour voters to become Labour Party members.
And if everybody was being well-behaved, disciplined, quiet and sticking on the mineral water at these summer parties, we would have nothing to talk about. So thanks all MPs from all sides, and thank you very much indeed for the newspaper review. Fascinating.
Well, let's have a look at what's on the front pages this morning. The Mail on Sunday leads on comments by former Conservative Cabinet Minister Andrew Mitchell, who reportedly called Theresa May dead in the water. He's told Sky that the claims are an overheated report of a private dinner conversation. The Sunday Telegraph says the Prime Minister has seized on Donald Trump's pledge of a trade deal with the UK to head off a rebellion. The PM says a deal with the US puts Brexit back on track, but Remainers say they'll still try to derail her repeal bill. That's in the Sunday Times. And Donald Trump's promise of a fast and powerful trade deal is also the lead for the Sunday Express. The Observer, however, leads on a warning from German exporters. Their priority will be protecting the single market, and it will be difficult to avoid hurting Britain. The Sunday Mirror reports on Linda Nolan being targeted online by someone pretending to be a Manchester bombing victim. The Sun on Sunday leads on a cancer scare for football manager Harry Redknapp, and the Star, of course, has the latest on Love Island, which I think we can all agree is the most interesting story this morning. Little insight into my own viewing habits there. On to more serious matters than Love Island. Sorry, I have to introduce my panel, don't I? I completely forgot about that. Two exciting excited about Love Island. To talk about all that, we're joined by the General Secretary of the Licensed Taxi Drivers Association, Steve McNamara, the columnist for The Independent, Jay Merrick, and the LBC presenter, Ian Dale.
Hello.
You're so well known, I thought everyone would know exactly who you are anyway. Let's start with the story on the front page of the Mail on Sunday, shall we? Theresa May must quit now, says the former Conservative Cabinet Minister Andrew Mitchell. Now, he says it's an overheated report, but this is not really very helpful, is it, for the Prime Minister?
It's not. It was a remark made 2 weeks ago at a private dinner with Tory MPs, the One Nation group of Tory MPs, which is sort of mainly lefty Tory MPs. And the convention in these things is that everything stays within those four walls. So it's unusual for something to leak like this. It took place the day after George Osborne said on television that Theresa May was a dead woman walking. So it's not exactly an original comment. And I think at that time, if you think back 2 weeks ago, it was just after Grenfell, and Theresa May was having a bit of a torrid time. I think 2 weeks on, things have changed a bit. But it does depend also on which paper you read. If you read the Mail on Sunday, it looks as though David Davis is sort of machinating and all the rest of it. You read the Sunday Times and Tim Shipman, their political editor, he's quoting Andrew Mitchell as saying, he says, but Mitchell has told potential Tory rebels to go and lie down in a darkened room and then take a holiday. Slight rather different to what he's being quoted as saying in the Mail on Sunday. Now, it's inevitable. There are, of course, after that election result, there are lots of Tory MPs thinking, well, is she the woman to take us into the next election? Most people think she won't take them into the next election. But there are 66 Tory MPs with majorities of 5,000 or less. Now, if you are one of those MPs, the last thing you want is another general election anytime soon. And a change of leadership would inevitably lead to Labour saying, well, come on, let's have another general election. And the pressure for that might be irresistible. So I certainly don't detect any sign of Tory MPs really wanting a change at the moment, even though they recognise it will have to come at some point.
What's your sort of feeling, Jay Merrick? Do you think the kind of fear of Jeremy Corbyn in number 10 is perhaps the thing that's saving Theresa May?
Yeah, I think there was a poll in the week, wasn't there, with an 7.8 point lead for Labour, which was extraordinary. And as Ian says, this was 2 weeks ago, and it was when, you know, everyone was saying she was in such a difficult position after Grenfell. And she has stabilised it slightly. I think going to the G20 makes her sort of look like she's getting on with the job, and it's sort of also, you know, Andrew Mitchell, very close to David Davis, as we know, but it's probably in David Davis's interest to carry on as Brexit Secretary, get a good deal, what he sees as a good deal for Britain. He doesn't want to be part of any plot and look like he's trying to do down the Prime Minister, because that could be fatal for him. So it's best that he sits tight. But what this does show is that he is in a great position if she does decide to call it a day. He's there.
What about these kamikaze MPs, these Tory MPs that are going to sabotage the whole ship simply so, according to the Mail, we get a dose of Corbyn and then 5 years later we all revert to the Tories?
Trouble is, a dose of Corbyn might be uncurable.
Well, you may well say that, Ian, but...
What's your feeling about a dose of Corbyn? Is it something you'd welcome, or...?
You've already had this debate downstairs. I got beat up. Going into Brexit, I think we're probably better off where we are at the moment. But I mean, post-Brexit, I think that Corbyn has shown a new force to Labour politics. I think he's certainly energised the young. There's people now talking about politics that never did before. I think there's a genuine possibility of a resurgence of a two-party system, much more so than we've had for the last 10 or 12 years. And I think it's a good thing.
There is a school of thought among some Tories that Brexit would be safe with Corbyn. Certainly,
because he's a secret Brexiteer, is the idea?
I don't think he's a secret Brexiteer. He is a Brexiteer. If you look at his voting record on European issues, if you look at what he's said in the past, I think we all know where his sympathies lie on this. So for UKIPers, for Tory Eurosceptics, I don't think they would particularly fear Corbyn on that basis. It would just be everything else that they wouldn't
We'd get a harder Brexit with Corbyn than we will with Marr.
You never know.
Let's have a look now at the Telegraph, shall we? Trump's wife charms Putin. Now the daughter takes a G20 limelight too. Jay Merrick, it does appear that she's doing quite a lot of soft diplomacy, doesn't it, Ivanka Trump?
I mean, I wanted a female president of the United States, but I wanted one who was elected, and Ivanka Trump is not elected. And I think it's outrageous, actually, that she can sit at a table with other G20 leaders. I mean, she was standing in whilst the president was at other meetings, and she's here pictured with Christine Lagarde at a women's entrepreneurship event. But she's not elected. I mean, the First Lady is a recognised position in US politics, but even she, you wouldn't expect to see Hillary Clinton or Michelle Obama or Barbara Bush at a G20 meeting.
She is an advisor, an officially appointed advisor to the president.
But only because she's the daughter, and I just think it's...
Well, she must have some talents to hold that position.
I'm sure she's incredibly talented, but to sort of see her at the... I think she probably is, but to see her at a...
But if Theresa May pops out of the plenary session, a civil servant takes her place and sits at the table, and that civil servant wouldn't be elected. So yes. I'm slightly playing devil's advocate, but...
But I just think it's the sort of whole nepotism thing. I mean, actually, nothing really surprises anymore with Donald Trump, but it doesn't mean to say we shouldn't still be outraged.
Do you think sometimes she does perhaps soften some of Donald Trump's or her father's views on things? I mean, she's clearly someone that he respects and listens to. And actually, when it comes to women's rights and stuff like that, she does actually seem to be perhaps pursuing a more progressive line, perhaps.
It would, yeah, she perhaps, but it would be good if she had persuaded him not to sign all various things on abortion rights and so on. I mean, it's if she had that much influence and she cared that much about women's rights, we wouldn't see Donald Trump doing what he's doing.
She wouldn't be his daughter, is that right?
That's probably true. Steve, you've picked out this story on the front page of The Observer, haven't you? German industry in stark warning to UK over Brexit. Their priority is to protect the single market. I mean, this is potentially a blow if it's true, isn't it? Because actually lots of people were relying on other...
What they're saying is that the German industry, the German car bodies, the BDIs, the German business groups, are going to force through a much harder Brexit for us, a much worse Brexit for us, and they're going to bite their nose off to spite their face and not sell us cars, just to teach us a lesson and do a better deal for them. Yeah, of course they are.
So you don't buy it?
I don't buy it at all. Mercedes and BMW and Audi are going to be, going full hell for leather to sell us as many cars as they do. They export an enormous amount of vehicles to us, other German goods as well, the sort of computer stuff, TV stuff. It's just
Well, I spent yesterday afternoon in an Audi showroom, as you do on a summer's day, and I bought an Audi. Now, does anyone seriously think that Audi are not going to want to sell us their cars after Brexit? We are Germany's largest car export market. 800,000 cars every year are sold to British customers. They are going to put enormous pressure on Angela Merkel to make sure that there is a reasonable deal.
The BDI says not.
Well, yeah, they might, but it's a bit like the CBI in this country. Yeah. We know that the CBI is basically another arm of Brussels in this country.
Well, we've got the CBI on later, so we'll have to put that
I hope you give them a hard time, because I thought their intervention this week was an absolute disgrace. And I think Caroline Fairbairn, is it her you're talking to? Their chief executive at the business summit with David Davis on Friday evening, I hope he gave her a piece of his mind, because it was calculated to do damage to the British bargaining position. And I just hope nobody takes any notice of them.
What's your view, Jane? Do you think all this is just kind of political scaremongering?
The Germans, of course, are going to paint Britain outside of the EU as a worse situation and they want Britain to stay in the EU. So a lot of it is just, talking up how bad it's going to be. And of course, the German car industry is still going to be thriving. We're still going to buy the cars, but there is a lot of politics going on, and they want Britain to stay in the EU, and because that's not going to happen, they are bound to paint it badly. But as Ian says, they also want Britain to have a bad deal. It does work both ways. It's not just about what is good for Britain, it's what's good for post-Brexit
Europe. Lots of self-interest.
If the dynamics were the other way round and we were exporting far more than we were importing to the EU, it would be a very different kettle of fish.
Interesting. Well, thanks very much, all of you, for your views on this morning's newspapers.
I've been getting